flesh remembering. Another thing I like to do with free verse is to try to come up with some kind of repetition like I did in the last poem. And I think that sort of works. I hope it does. When I crawl through catacombs, gathering dust that must be bones, I'm thinking it is the flesh that's always remembering. When I crawl through catacombs, gathering the dust that must be bones, I'm remembering is flesh always. When I crawl through catacombs, gathering dust that must be bones, I'm thinking the dust must be bones, remembering the flesh must be bones, remembering. You can also get away.
What inspired that?
That's a good question.
That's a good question. I think I was Googling around one day and ran into the catacombs. I think the ones under Paris rather than the ones under Rome. And just got to thinking about getting in that. And, you know, again, as a chaplain and as a minister, one gets a lot of dust-to-dust stuff going on. And spreading of ashes and such. So
there's an idea of cellular memory. Is that, have you heard of that?
yes, I have.
All right.
What is that?
It's the idea that your cells, like, if, you know, I have ancestors from Ireland, and so the idea is if I go there, it will feel very, very familiar.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
I think that's probably true. I really, I mean, I don't know if any of you, those of you who have gone to wherever you're from, you know, but the weirdest thing was the first time I ever flew to London, the plane got rerouted because we ran out of gas, out of fuel, and we landed in Wales, which is where I'm from, you know, and it was weird because, you know.
Way back.
Way back, yes, yes, way back, yes. And my ancestors had left there 200 years ago, poor, stupid farmers. And I got back, you know, a poor, slightly educated farmer. And the first place I got back to in Europe was Wales, and there were the sheep wandering around. You know, it's weird.
Yeah.
So yes, well, and I mean,
migration, bird migration, and lemmings. That's
true.
evident that those instinctual behaviors, you know, how do they don't, behaviors aren't remembered, it's instinctual, so yeah.
It's that, you know, if Plato's correct, and I'm not smart enough to say he's not, that's the argument for eternal life or an afterlife. You know, is the forms, right? The big abstractions, and that's why I don't argue with people who tell me, you know, those things, because I don't know. The law of recurrence. Speaking of. The big bad wolf is always at the door, knocking, knocking at the door. Sometimes a house of straw, sometime wood. And you know the rest, for there's no rest. This always at the door, knocking, knocking. Chao John is a Buddhist monk, and he wrote a little poem about always what Buddhists talk about, which is not getting somewhere, but the process is all we have. So I was reading that little poem and decided to write a free verse version, and so this is after Chao John Monk. How is it we talk the end before we hit the shore? It is the rowing, autumn wind, hard on the water. There's your Buddhist enlightenment for the day.
That's not, I'm reminded of that verse in that passage in John. Where, no,
Which one? No.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's the one where Jesus has already risen and shown himself a few times, and Simon Peter's at the lake and it's evening and suddenly he says, I'm going fishing. And, you know, his comrades say, so are we. And they go fishing and catch nothing, and then they, you know, a man on the shore, stranger, says, you know, try the other side of the boat. And so they did, and they caught fish. And Simon Peter plunges himself into the sea, going back to the shore, and they row their heavy loads to land. So I thought of that when I heard that.
You were free associating, but
All right.
but that's good.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's what short. The only place you can get with a short poem is to get your reader to free associate.
Well,
You know, well, otherwise you don't. You know, because I mean, you know, for me anyway, poems are like condensed, you know, tomato soup. I mean, you can't eat it out of the can. You gotta put some water in there that's your own tap water, or you're not gonna, you know, it's kind of thing. Another of my projects is the Gospel according to David, and I'm really seriously working on this. It's I took the book of Mark in King James Version and just slapped it in a word processing program. It's, you know, it's open copyright after all. Mark's dead, and so slap that sucker in, and then I'm translating it, quote unquote, into contemporary English, you know, and then but I'm putting in my favorite parts from others because Mark was the first of the gospel writers, and that's what Matthew and Luke did too. So you know, so
these are heavily edited.
yeah, well, you know,
And
so I can,
translated freely. And
yeah, so I can, you know, so I can do that. Yeah, yeah. Metaphysical points. Location, location, location is everything. And here you are, everywhere. Again, repetition stuff, almost as if ditty. I like the term ditty. Our poor brains, our poor brains. Why won't they work better, our poor brains? They almost find truth. They ought to find truth. They almost get us somewhere. Our poor brains, our poor brains, our poor brains. So close to truth. So close to somewhere. Our poor brains. Almost the truth. Oughtn't they find truth? Our poor brains. No.
have you ever read these and put them on YouTube?
I have a couple of things. You know what? Yeah, unfortunately
he is now.
Yay!
Yeah. That'll happen.
My kid knows how to. My kid knows how to do YouTube and helps me record a couple, but I don't know how to do it. Ozymandias is a poem by Shelley that many of you were forced to read in high school about an ancient king, and his head is laying in the sand. A statue of his head is laying in the sand. He's forgotten. You remember this poem? Well, it's Ozymandias, who is the name of this poem. You don't really need to know that poem to read this, but I was walking through a cemetery. I love walking through cemeteries, and just thinking about all of these important people, and again, memento mori. The founding fathers lie by the mothers. So important then. The first here, the first there, the biggest, the only, the best. If only you remembered the old stones sigh, you would be impressed. Now this book is the latest book that came out, and it's based on a poem by William Carlos Williams, in which he eats some plums and feels guilty. And I got to thinking about that, and I decided that it was a poem about sin and then confession and finally forgiveness. So the whole book is a series of poems thinking about sin and redemption and that sort of thing, and going into the story of Adam and Eve and the serpent, who's of course the hero of the book, and Yahweh, who comes off not quite so well as making rules like you can't eat the fruit.